I'm Iris, 34 female. I live in a modest one-bedroom apartment in the city and work as a senior data analyst. My life is built on numbers, patterns, and predictability, which is exactly how I like it. For the past 5 years, all my planning and saving was for one goal: a house of my own, a secret I kept until the day I saw my own mother giving it away. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. For as long as I can remember, I have been the responsible one, the sensible one, the one who colors inside the lines while my younger brother, Alfie, has always been encouraged to paint the whole wall. Our mother, Penelope, a retired bank manager, viewed my steady, predictable career path as a sign of stability, but she saw Alfie's meandering journey as a sign of artistic potential. His dream of opening a boutique coffee shop was spoken of with romantic reverence, while my promotions were met with a simple, "That's nice, dear. Just make sure you're saving for retirement." I didn't mind, not really. I found comfort in my spreadsheets and data models. I liked the clear, binary nature of my world. If you input the work, you get the output. If you save a specific percentage of your income for 60 consecutive months, you will have a down payment for a house. It was this simple, unassailable logic that became my secret obsession. While my family assumed I was living a quiet, somewhat boring life in my rented apartment, I was meticulously building my future in silence. The sacrifices were my quiet companions. I said no to expensive vacations with friends, opting for staycations where my biggest expense was a new book. I became an expert at meal prepping, turning Sunday afternoons into a strategic culinary operation to avoid the temptation of takeout. My car was 10 years old, reliable but thoroughly unglamorous. I wore clothes until they were frayed at the seams. Every dollar saved was a brick in the foundation of a dream nobody else could see. This dream wasn't just about property, it was about sovereignty. It was about creating a space in the world that was unequivocally mine, built by my own hands, where my opinion was the only one that mattered. A sanctuary from the subtle, lifelong pressure of being the dependable daughter who was expected to support everyone else's dreams. After 4 years of aggressive saving, I began my search. I wasn't looking for a mansion. I just wanted something with character, with a patch of earth I could call my own. I spent months scouring listings, my data analysis skills perfectly suited to spotting market trends and undervalued properties. And then I found it. It was a small, 2-bedroom bungalow from the 1950s, nestled on a quiet, tree-lined street. It needed work. The kitchen was a time capsule of avocado green appliances, and the wallpaper in the living room was a floral monstrosity, but it had what the agents called good bones. More than that, it had a soul. A sprawling oak tree shaded a small, overgrown backyard, and a large picture window in the living room looked out onto the street. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel it. This was it. This was the place. The process of buying it was a nerve-wracking tightrope walk. My friend, Ruby, a sharp and fiercely loyal real estate lawyer, guided me through the legal maze. "You've got this, Iris," she'd tell me over the phone, her voice a steady anchor in the sea of my anxiety. "Your finances are immaculate. They'd be fools not to give you the mortgage." She was right. The bank approved my loan and my offer on the house was accepted. I kept the entire process a secret. I knew, with the certainty of a proven hypothesis, that if I told my mother, the dream would become tainted. Penelope's help was never just help, it was a full-scale takeover. She would have an opinion on the location, the price, the interest rate. She would have insisted on attending the inspection and would have pointed out 1,000 flaws I didn't care about. Then, inevitably, the conversation would have drifted to Alfie. "You know, a 2-bedroom is a lot of space for one person, Iris. Alfie and Emily are so cramped in their apartment." The seed would be planted, the guilt expertly cultivated until my dream was no longer my own. I couldn't bear the thought of it. So, I told no one. The day of the closing was surreal. I sat in Ruby's sterile office, signing a mountain of paperwork that represented the culmination of half a decade of silent, relentless effort. When the final document was signed, Ruby slid a small, plain envelope across the table. Inside were two freshly cut keys. They felt impossibly heavy in my palm, like medals of honor. "Congratulations, homeowner," she said, her smile genuine and bright. "You did it." I drove to the house, my heart thrumming against my ribs. It was a gray, overcast afternoon, but as I pulled into the short driveway, the sun broke through the clouds, illuminating the little bungalow in a warm, golden light. I walked up the path, my hand trembling slightly as I pushed the key into the lock. The click of the tumbler turning was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. The house smelled of dust and old paint and limitless potential. I walked through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. This was the living room, where I would put a comfortable sofa and a bookshelf filled to bursting. This was the kitchen, which I would one day renovate with clean white cabinets and a butcher block countertop. This was the second bedroom, my future home office. And this was the master bedroom, where I would sleep peacefully, knowing that I was safe in a space I had earned. I hadn't moved a single box in yet. My plan was to spend the next week cleaning and painting. I had scheduled a family dinner for the upcoming Saturday. I pictured it clearly. I would invite them to my apartment, and then, after dinner, I would announce my news. I would show them the pictures, tell them the story, and present it as a finished accomplishment. A fact. Something they couldn't influence or co-opt. It was the perfect plan, logical and controlled. It was my plan. And for a few blissful hours, standing alone in my quiet, empty house, I believed it was foolproof. I had the keys. I had the deed. I had my sanctuary. I had no idea that my family was already drawing up their own set of blueprints. The next few days were a blur of quiet excitement. I spent my evenings after work at the house, dressed in old clothes, scrubbing floors and peeling away decades of stubborn wallpaper. Each strip that came off the wall felt like shedding an old skin. The work was exhausting but deeply fulfilling. This was the part of homeownership no one talks about, the intimate act of claiming a space, of pouring your own sweat and effort into its bones until it begins to feel like an extension of yourself. I was blissfully alone in my little world, armed with a scraper and a bucket of soapy water, and I had never been happier. On Tuesday afternoon, I left work an hour early. A delivery of painting supplies was scheduled to arrive, and I wanted to be there to sign for it. I was also eager to take some final measurements in the kitchen. I had found a vintage-style refrigerator online that I was obsessed with, and I needed to confirm it would fit in the designated nook. I hummed along to the radio as I drove, my mind filled with palettes and swatches, completely unaware that the sanctuary I was driving towards had already been breached. As I turned onto my new street, my stomach gave a little flutter of joy. It was the pleasant, proprietary feeling of coming home, but the feeling evaporated the moment I saw the car parked in my driveway. It was my mother's sensible, silver sedan, a car I could recognize from a mile away. For a moment, I was just confused, my brows furrowed. How did she even know this address? I hadn't told a soul. I had been so careful. I parked my car across the street, a sudden, cold sense of unease creeping up my spine. I cut the engine and just sat there, watching my house. My mother wasn't a spontaneous visitor. Every action she took was calculated. Her being here was not a coincidence. I needed to know what was happening. Instead of walking up to the front door, I slipped out of my car and crept along the side of the neighbor's hedge, my heart starting to beat a frantic, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The living room's large picture window was right at the front of the house. I positioned myself behind a large azalea bush, giving me a clear, unobstructed view inside. And that's when my world tilted on its axis. My mother, Penelope, was standing in the middle of the living room, her arms spread wide in a gesture of grand presentation. But she wasn't alone. Standing before her, looking around with wide, greedy eyes, were my brother Alfie and his wife, Emily. The scene was so grotesquely wrong that my brain struggled to process it. They were in my house, my secret house, and my mother was acting like she was the real estate agent. "You see," Penelope said, her voice carrying clearly through the open window. "The natural light in here is just fantastic. And once we get rid of this ghastly wallpaper, it will feel so much bigger. The word hit me like a physical blow. Emily, an aspiring social media influencer whose life was a curated series of photo opportunities, was already framing a shot with her hands. "Oh, Penny, it's perfect. I can see it now. A big, plush white rug right here. It would be amazing for my unboxing videos. The aesthetic is so important, you know." Alfie, looking more animated than I had seen him in years, was pacing near the far wall. "This is where the espresso bar would go," he announced, his voice filled with a faux expert tone. "A proper La Marzocco machine. It would be the centerpiece of the whole house, the heart of my business plan." My breath caught in my throat. I felt a wave of nausea so intense I had to press my hand against my mouth. They weren't just looking at my house. They were moving in. They were redesigning it, rebranding it, colonizing it with their own ridiculous dreams. But it was my mother's next words that shattered me completely. She placed a comforting hand on Alfie's shoulder, her face a mask of benevolent maternal wisdom. "I knew you'd love it," she said, her voice oozing with self-congratulation. "It's the perfect starter home for you too. The second bedroom will be a wonderful nursery when the time comes." She paused, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that still managed to find its way directly into my heart like a shard of ice. "Iris is doing so well for herself. She's practical. She doesn't need all this space, not really. You two are the ones who need a leg up right now. It's what a family does. We support each other. She'll understand. Once she sees how happy you are here, she'll be thrilled to help." She'll be thrilled to help. The world went silent. The buzzing in my ears drowned out the chirping of the birds in the old oak tree. They were talking about me as if I were a financial instrument, a resource to be leveraged for the benefit of the golden child. My 5 years of sacrifice, my 60 months of disciplined denial, had been reduced to a convenient stepping stone for my brother's whims. My dream of a sanctuary had been twisted into a starter home for them. The very secrecy I had cultivated to protect my accomplishment was now being used as proof that it was unimportant, something I could easily part with. I felt a dizzying combination of rage and heartbreak. My legs felt weak, and I stumbled back from the window, my shoulder bumping against the rough bark of a tree. I couldn't breathe. The keys in my pocket, which had once felt like metals, now felt like stones, weighing me down. I had to get out of there. I couldn't face them. I couldn't let them see me. To confront them now would be to play a role in their twisted little drama, to be the selfish daughter who ruins the beautiful surprise. My mother had planned this. She had engineered a situation where my only two options were to be a martyr or a monster. With tears blurring my vision, I retreated, moving as silently as I had approached. I got back into my car, my hands shaking so violently I could barely fit the key into the ignition. I drove away from my new house, from my stolen dream, my mind a chaotic storm of betrayal. They were strangers in my sanctuary, and the person who had given them the key was my own mother. I drove without a destination, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, the city streets a meaningless blur outside my window. The tidy, predictable world of my spreadsheets had been shattered, replaced by a chaotic mess of raw emotion I had no formula to process. Shock, anger, and a profound, cavernous sense of betrayal churned within me. I finally pulled into the parking lot of a quiet city park, killed the engine, and let out a sob that seemed to be torn from the very core of my being. After the initial storm of tears subsided, something else began to take its place. The hurt was still there, a deep, aching wound, but it was being rapidly cooled and hardened by something else, the cold, clear logic of my analyst's brain. My mother's words echoed in my head, not as a source of pain anymore, but as data points. "We'll get rid of this wallpaper. She'll be thrilled to help. She'll understand." This wasn't a spontaneous, misguided act of generosity. This was a premeditated campaign. It was a calculated deception, and I had been the target. My mind began to race, replaying recent interactions with my mother, now viewing them through this new, horrifying lens. The seemingly innocent questions she had been asking for months suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. 2 months ago, over coffee, "Iris, darling, I worry you work so hard. Is your landlord treating you well? Rents are just getting so unreasonable these days. A month ago, on the phone, I was just balancing my own books and it got me thinking. Are you managing to put away a little something extra? It's so important to have a cushion. Even a few weeks ago, you seem so happy lately, so focused. Is there something new in your life? I had been vague, deflecting with non-answers about work projects and saving for a new laptop. I thought I was being clever, protecting my secret. But I realized now that my deflections were, to her, confirmations. She wasn't just making conversation, she was gathering intelligence. She knew I was planning something big. But how? How did she find the specific house? The address wasn't on any public document yet, and the sale had been private. And more importantly, how did they get inside? My mind flashed to a conversation from years ago. I had a magnetic lockbox with a spare key hidden under the metal railing of my apartment building's shared mailbox area. It was for emergencies, in case I ever locked myself out. I had foolishly told her where it was, a detail I had long since forgotten. My heart hammered against my chest. I started the car and drove straight back to my apartment. I parked haphazardly and ran to the mailboxes in the lobby. I reached under the cool metal railing, my fingers searching for the familiar shape of the small, gray box. My stomach dropped. It was gone. The theft of the key was the missing piece of the puzzle. It confirmed this wasn't just an assumption on her part, it was an invasion. She had physically taken something from me to enable this, but the key alone wasn't enough. She needed the address. I sprinted up to my apartment, my mind cataloging every possible security breach. I had a small filing cabinet where I kept important documents. I pulled open the drawer labeled Finances. Everything looked neat, but I had a system. I kept the files flush with the left side. The folder containing my mortgage pre-approval and the initial offer documents was slightly askew, shifted a few millimeters to the right. It was a tiny detail, something no one else would ever notice, but to my pattern-seeking brain, it was a glaring red flag. She had been in here, in my apartment, in my private files. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She must have come while I was at work, using her stolen key, and searched until she found what she was looking for. The betrayal was no longer just emotional. It was a violation of my home, my privacy, my fundamental sense of security. I sank onto my sofa, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. My mother's entire plan unfurled in my mind. She had snooped, discovered my secret, and instead of being happy for me, she had immediately seen it as an asset she could reallocate. She had taken Alfie and Emily to the house to build up their excitement, to make them feel like it was already theirs. The family dinner I had planned for Saturday was meant to be my triumphant reveal, but she had intended to hijack it. She would have ambushed me, presenting my generous gift in front of my brother and his wife. She would have painted it as a noble sacrifice on my part, a beautiful gesture of familial love. I would have been trapped. Refusing would have meant looking petty, selfish, and cruel. Arguing would have meant destroying Alfie's and Emily's manufactured dreams right in front of them. She had planned to use my own decency and my aversion to conflict against me. It was then that I called Ruby. My voice was shaky at first, a torrent of frantic explanation pouring out of me. Ruby listened patiently, letting me vent my rage and my pain. When I was done, her voice was low and dangerous. "Okay, Iris," she said, and I could hear the lawyer in her click on. "Breathe, they have not won. They have just declared war on the wrong person." She gave them a tour, Ruby. A tour of my house with a key she stole from me. "First things first," Ruby said, her tone firm and grounding. "The house is legally, unequivocally yours. The deed is in your name. They were trespassing. Second, we need to secure your assets. I mean all of them. This is no longer just about the house." "The key, she must have a copy now," I whispered, the thought making me feel ill. "Then we change the locks. Immediately. Call a 24-hour locksmith and get it done tonight," Ruby commanded. "And your apartment. Change that lock too, and your passwords, Iris, bank accounts, email, everything. Your mother is not just a meddler, she's a security threat." Her words were a splash of cold water. She was right. The grieving daughter was being replaced by the data analyst. My pain was transforming, crystallizing into a cold, hard resolve. My mother had mistaken my quiet nature for weakness. She thought my practicality meant I lacked passion. She had analyzed me and come to the wrong conclusion. Now, it was my turn to analyze her. I would dissect her plan, find its weaknesses, and dismantle it, piece by calculated piece. This was my project now. And I never leave a project unfinished. My grief had been a wildfire, hot and consuming. But in its wake, something new was growing, a forest of cold, sharp icicles. My resolve was absolute. My mother and brother had treated my life's work as a community resource. I would now treat their deception as a data set to be analyzed and archived. The first step, as Ruby had instructed, was to secure my perimeter. That evening, under the cloak of darkness, a 24-hour locksmith met me at the bungalow. The quiet hum of his tools was a comforting sound as he replaced every lock on the property, the front door, the back door, even the flimsy lock on the garden shed. He handed me a new set of keys, their edges crisp and sharp. These keys felt different from the first set. They weren't just symbols of ownership, they were instruments of control. After he left, I installed a simple, motion-activated security camera I'd bought on the way over. I positioned it discreetly on the porch, angled to give me a perfect view of the front door and driveway. The little blue light that blinked to life when I activated it felt like a vigilant eye, my silent partner in this new, unwanted game. The next day, I had the locks on my apartment changed as well. The magnetic key box under the mailboxes remained empty, a small, hollow monument to my former trust. With my physical spaces secured, I turned my attention to the digital breadcrumbs. My mother was a retired bank manager, not a tech wizard. She would have been clumsy. I sat down at my laptop and began to dig. My filing cabinet had been the first clue, but the real trove of information would be online. I started with my email, scrolling through the login history. My heart lurched when I saw it, an access event from 2.5 weeks prior. The IP address was unfamiliar. A quick search traced it to a public computer at the main branch of the city library, the one located just 2 blocks from my mother's house. The timeline was damning. She had stolen my apartment key, let herself in, found my financial documents, and then, likely realizing the most current information would be in my email, she had gone to the library to cover her digital tracks. She must have guessed my password. I cringed with self-recrimination. It had been a combination of my childhood pet's name and my birth year, pathetically simple, a password a mother would easily guess. I felt a flush of shame, realizing how naive I had been. In a flurry of activity, I changed every password I had, creating long, complex strings of random characters that even I would have to save in a secure manager. I documented everything meticulously. I took a screenshot of the IP address login, along with a map showing the library's proximity to her home. I took photos of my slightly askew filing cabinet before I neatened it. I saved the receipt from the locksmith. I was building a case, not for a court of law, but for a court of my own making. The first piece of validation from my new security system came less than 24 hours after its installation. My phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected AT front door. I opened the app, my pulse quickening. The live feed showed my brother Alfie's car pulling into my driveway. He and Emily got out, looking cheerful and proprietary. Emily was holding her phone up, probably filming an Instagram story about their new journey. I watched my breath hell. As Alfie walked confidently up to the front door and inserted a key into the lock. I saw his confident posture deflate as the key refused to turn. He jiggled it, then tried again. His face clouded with confusion. He looked at the key, as if it were faulty, then back at the door. Emily stopped filming, her perfect smile faltering. "What's wrong?" I could practically hear her whining tone. Alfie shook his head, trying the lock one more time with frustrated force. He then pulled out his phone and made a call. I knew, with absolute certainty, who he was calling. He paced on the lawn, his voice agitated, gesturing angrily at the house. My house. After a few minutes of heated conversation, they got back in their car and sped away. their entitlement having collided with a wall of freshly installed brass and steel. I saved the video file, labeling it Attempted Entry 1. A grim, chilling smile touched my lips. It was a small victory, but it was intoxicating. For the first time since I saw them through the window, I felt a flicker of power. They had underestimated me. They thought I would crumble, that I would quietly accept the role they had assigned me. But a data analyst doesn't crumble in the face of unexpected variables. We recalibrate the model. And my model now had a singular, clear objective: to reclaim what was mine so completely and definitively that they would never mistake my kindness for weakness again. The paper trail was complete. The next step was to decide how I was going to use it. The inevitable phone call came on Thursday evening, exactly 2 days after Alfie and Emily's failed attempt to enter my house. I was sitting on the floor of my empty living room, surrounded by paint cans, when my phone buzzed with my mother's name. I took a deep, centering breath and answered, smoothing all emotion from my voice. "Hi, Mom." "Iris, darling." Penelope's voice was a waterfall of synthetic warmth. It was her benevolent matriarch tone, the one she used when she was about to manipulate someone for their own good. "I was just calling about our family dinner on Saturday. I am so looking forward to it. In fact, I have the most wonderful surprise to discuss with you. It's something I know will make the whole family very, very happy." My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity was stunning. Even after Alfie must have told her the keys didn't work, she was still forging ahead with her plan. She was going to try to persuade me, to guilt me, to wear me down until I agreed to her insane scheme. She thought the lock change was just a minor, temporary setback, an inconvenience she could smooth over with a few well-chosen, condescending words. This phone call was the final data point I needed. It confirmed her intent to ambush me, and it solidified my own plan. I had to beat her at her own game. I leaned into the role of the dutiful, unsuspecting daughter. "Oh, that sounds exciting, Mom," I said, my voice deliberately light and cheerful. "I'm looking forward to seeing you all too." "Wonderful, dear. We'll see you at your apartment at 7 then." "Actually," I said, injecting a note of playful mystery into my tone, "I have a little surprise of my own. Let's change the venue. I'll text you the address on Saturday afternoon. Just be prepared for something special." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head as she recalibrated. "A surprise? How lovely, Iris. All right then, we'll wait for your text. I'll see you Saturday." As soon as I hung up, I called Ruby. "It's on," I said. "Phase 2 is a go." My plan was simple in its design, but devastating in its potential execution. The family dinner would still happen, but it would not be the cozy, celebratory affair my mother envisioned. It would be a tribunal, and it would take place on my home turf, in the very house that was the source of all this conflict. My first task was to set the stage. I spent Friday evening not painting, but preparing the scene. I went to a rental store and got a stark, plain white card table and 4 matching, uncomfortable-looking folding chairs. I set them up directly in the center of the vast, empty living room. The bare floors and unadorned walls made the small setup look like an interrogation room. There would be no comfortable sofas to sink into, no warm ambience to soften the blow of what was to come. There would only be the truth, laid bare under the single, harsh light of the overhead fixture. For dinner, I had no intention of cooking. I wasn't going to perform the role of hostess for my own executioners. Instead, I arranged to have 4 simple boxes of takeout from a local restaurant delivered just before they were scheduled to arrive. It was practical, impersonal, and sent a clear message. This was a meeting, not a celebration. The final, most important part of my preparation was the evidence. I created a neat, professional-looking folder. Inside, I placed a serai of documents, each in its own plastic sleeve. The first was a crisp, clean copy of the signed and registered deed to the house, with my name printed in bold, undeniable type. The second was a high-resolution printout of a still image from the security camera footage. Alfie, his face a perfect mask of frustration, trying the useless key in my new lock. The third was the screenshot of my email login history, showing the access from the library's IP address, with the date and time clearly marked. I even included a small map with a red pin on the library and another on my mother's house, the 2-block distance explicitly noted. It was a cold, factual narrative of her betrayal. As I placed the folder on the card table, I felt a strange sense of calm. I was not acting out of rage anymore. My actions were precise, deliberate, and entirely justified. For years, my family had operated under an unwritten set of rules where my feelings were secondary, my accomplishments were communal, and my boundaries were merely suggestions. Tonight, I was handing them a new contract. The terms were non-negotiable, and the penalties for violation would be severe. My mother wanted a surprise. I was going to give her one she would never forget. On Saturday evening, the air in the empty bungalow was still and heavy with anticipation. At 6 o'clock, exactly 1 hour before the designated meeting time, I sent a group text to my mother, Alfie, and Emily. It contained only the address of the house and a short message. Surprise, see you here. I watched on the security camera feed as their car, my mother's silver sedan, pulled into the driveway at precisely 7:05 p.m., punctual as ever. Their body language, even on the grainy monitor, was telling. Alfie and Emily got out looking excited, almost giddy. They must have believed my surprise was that I had caved. They probably thought I had changed the locks to be dramatic and was now ready to present them with their new home, perhaps with a big red bow on the door. My mother emerged last, a serene, self-satisfied smile on her face. She was the victorious general, arriving to accept the peaceful surrender of a territory she had already conquered. I let them knock. I let them stand on the porch for a full 30 seconds, their excitement slowly morphing into confusion before I opened the door. I stood there, blocking the entrance, my expression perfectly neutral. "Iris," my mother began, her smile faltering slightly at my lack of enthusiasm. "What a lovely idea, to show us the house yourself." "Come in," I said, my voice flat. I stepped aside and held the door open. The sight that greeted them was not what they were expecting. Their eyes scanned the cavernous, empty living room, devoid of any warmth or welcome. They saw the bare walls, the dusty floors, and in the center of it all, the stark, clinical setup of the card table and 4 folding chairs. The takeout boxes sat on the table, unopened. The collective drop in their expressions was immediate and deeply satisfying. Alfie's grin vanished. Emily's posture stiffened, her influencer-ready smile replaced with a look of bewildered disappointment. My mother's face was a canvas of confusion, the first flicker of doubt appearing in her confident eyes. "What is this?" Penelope asked, her voice losing its sugary edge. "Dinner," I replied calmly. "Please sit down." I walked to the table and took my seat, placing my hands on the table on either side of the evidence folder. They hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly followed, taking the chairs opposite me. The silence was thick and uncomfortable. They were waiting for an explanation, and I was going to give them one, but on my terms. I let the silence stretch, forcing them to sit with their discomfort. Finally, when I could see my mother was about to speak, I began. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke in the same measured, dispassionate tone I used when presenting quarterly findings to a board of directors. "I know you've all seen the house before," I started, my eyes fixed on Penelope. "You gave a very thorough tour last Tuesday, Mom. Alfie, you seemed particularly taken with this wall for your espresso bar." My mother went pale. Alfie recoiled as if I had slapped him. Emily's eyes widened, and she looked from me to her mother-in-law, a dawning horror on her face. I don't know what you're talking about," Penelope stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. I slid the folder to the center of the table and opened it to the first page. "Let's not pretend. Let's look at the data." I tapped the first document. "This is the deed to the house. As you can see, the registered owner is Iris Miller. Not Alfie Miller, not Emily Miller, and certainly not the Miller Family Trust. Just me." I flipped the page. This is a photograph taken by my security camera on Wednesday afternoon. You can see Alfie here attempting to use a key in the front door. A key that, interestingly enough, no longer works. I wonder where he got that key. Alfie sank lower in his chair, his face burning with shame. He refused to look at me. And this, I said, flipping to the final page, is my personal favorite. It's a record from my email provider showing an unauthorized login to my personal account from an IP address that traces back to the main city library. 2 blocks from your house, Mom. I imagine that's where you found the address after you let yourself into my apartment with the spare key you stole and went through my private financial documents. The room was utterly silent. There was no defense. I had laid out the truth in cold, hard, undeniable facts. Penelope, seeing her web of lies completely dismantled, abandoned denial and switched to her final, most potent weapon: emotional blackmail. I was only trying to help, she insisted, her voice rising with manufactured indignation. Your brother needs this. He and Emily are struggling to get started. You have a good career, you're stable. Is it so selfish for a mother to want to help her son? For a family to share its good fortune? This was the moment where in the past I would have faltered, my resolve eroded by her expert guilt-tripping. But not anymore. I finally allowed my own emotion to surface, not as fire but as ice. Help, I asked, my voice dangerously low. You call theft help? You call invasion of privacy help? You call plotting behind my back to give away the single most significant accomplishment of my life help? I turned my gaze to Alfie and Emily. And you, I said, my voice cutting through the air. You walked through these rooms, planning your future, redecorating my home without a single thought for me. Did either of you, for 1 second, stop and think that this might be wrong? That I might have my own dreams for this space? Or was it just easier to take what was offered? They had no answer. They just stared at their plates. My mother made one last, desperate attempt. But what are we supposed to do now? She wailed, her voice filled with the theatrical despair of a woman who has lost control of the narrative. I stood up, my movement signaling the end of the meeting. I looked at the 3 of them, these people who called themselves my family, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty distance. That, I said, my voice clear and final, is no longer my problem. As of tonight, my financial stability, my emotional support, and my good nature are no longer resources that you are entitled to. This house is mine. I walked to the front door and opened it, letting the cool night air rush in. The dinner I invited you to is over. Please leave my house. They left without another word. The blustering indignation had evaporated, replaced by a stunned, hollow silence. Alfie and Emily scurried out first, their heads bowed in shame, unable to meet my eyes. My mother was the last to leave. She stood in the doorway for a moment, her face a crumpled mask of disbelief, as if she was still waiting for me to break, to apologize, to revert to the daughter she thought she knew. When I simply stared back, my expression unyielding, she finally turned and walked to her car, her defeat radiating from her slumping shoulders. I closed the door behind them, and the click of the new deadbolt sliding into place was the most profound and satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a final, irrevocable boundary being drawn. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door and let out a long, shuddering breath I felt like I had been holding for my entire life. I didn't eat the takeout. I left the boxes on the table, a strange monument to the trial that had just occurred. That night, I didn't go back to my apartment. I unrolled a sleeping bag I had in my car and spent my first night in the house on an air mattress in the middle of the empty living room. Staring up at the dark, unfamiliar ceiling, I didn't feel lonely or scared. I felt a sense of peace that was deeper and more complete than any I had ever known. It wasn't the triumphant housewarming I had once envisioned, but it was something far more significant. It was a reclamation. I was taking back my space, my dream, and my self-respect. The days that followed brought the predictable fallout. My phone was bombarded with a storm of messages from my mother. They came in stages, following a pattern I now recognized as her cycle of manipulation. First came The rage, a series of furious, all-caps texts accusing me of being ungrateful, cruel, and selfish, of tearing the family apart. When I didn't respond, the rage morphed into guilt. Long, rambling voicemails about how she had sacrificed everything for her children, how she was only trying to do what was best, how I had broken her heart. When that also failed to elicit a response, the final stage began, pleading. "Iris, please just talk to me. We can fix this. We're family." Alfie sent a single, 3-line text message a week later. "I'm sorry, Iris. Mom got us all excited and I wasn't thinking straight. I messed up." It was a weak, pathetic apology that took no real ownership, placing the blame squarely on our mother. I deleted it without replying. Emily, in a move that was perfectly in character, simply blocked me on all social media platforms. I knew I needed to make the separation official to protect myself from any future incursions. On Ruby's advice, I had her draft a formal cease and desist letter. It was delivered by courier to my mother's house. The letter was stark and legal, outlining her actions: theft of a key, unauthorized entry into my residence, and unauthorized access of my personal information, and stating in no uncertain terms that any further contact, any attempt to visit my home or workplace, would be met with legal action. It was a harsh, definitive line in the sand, and it worked. The messages stopped. The silence they left behind was deafening at first, a void where a lifetime of familial obligation used to be. But slowly, peacefully, the silence became my sanctuary. I threw myself into the house, and the house, in turn, began to heal me. I painted the living room walls a warm, calming shade of sage green. I tore out the old kitchen cabinets myself, reveling in the satisfying crunch of demolition. I hired a contractor to help with the parts I couldn't do, and I paid for it with money I had earned, making decisions that were mine and mine alone. With Ruby and other friends, I planted a garden in the overgrown backyard. We spent a sunny Saturday digging in the dirt, planting hydrangeas and lavender, our laughter echoing in the space that had once been filled with tension. They brought housewarming gifts, a beautiful ceramic mug, a set of wind chimes, a bottle of good wine. We celebrated my new home, my new beginning, on my terms. This was my real family, the one I had chosen, the one built on mutual respect and genuine affection. Months later, I was sitting in my favorite armchair in my beautifully furnished living room, a cup of tea in my hands. The late afternoon sun streamed through the picture window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Outside, the wind chimes tinkled softly. The house was no longer just a structure of wood and nails. It was a living, breathing part of me, filled with peace and light. I thought about my mother, my brother, and his wife. I didn't feel anger anymore, just a quiet sense of pity. They were trapped in their toxic ecosystem of entitlement and manipulation, unable to grow. The betrayal had been painful, the most painful experience of my life. But I came to see it as a necessary catalyst. It was the earthquake that had to happen to collapse a faulty foundation, forcing me to build something new, something stronger in its place. I had set out to buy myself a house, but in the end, I had bought myself something far more valuable: my freedom. This front door was mine, and for the first time in my life, I was the only one with the key.